Today we have a very unique treat. What started out as a simple request for a comment to my upcoming article in the Maritime Executive magazine discussing blockchain in transportation logistics turned into a highly informative hour-long video interviewing session. I feel honored to have gotten to speak with the incredibly intelligent and humble Mr. Andreas Antonopoulos and urge those who are unfamiliar with his books to go out and get copies and or watch his other YouTube videos. Details and links will be provided in the show notes. As this is the first video of this type, we kindly ask that if you got value from it, to let us know and be sure to follow and subscribe to our listed channels. Big thanks to Photomayo and Scoop Research for sponsoring the production of this video, and we hope you enjoy it. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the author, coder, and entrepreneur, Mr. Andreas M. Antonopoulos. Thank you, Mr. Antonopoulos, for taking your time from your very busy schedule to meet with me. For those following the cryptocurrency and blockchain space, you're a master communicator who requires very little introduction. I've personally been following your work throughout countless hours of studies, and I'm finally becoming fluent in the matrix, in large thanks to you, sir. Today is my great honor to introduce you to what I hope will be the next sector to adopt this revolutionary technology, the maritime and oil and gas industries, via the audience, the Maritime Executive magazine, and my newly formed rogue.io channel. Sir, as a graduate from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in Maritime Operations and Technology, and then being a former Marine surveyor and ISO auditor, the applications within the industry were quite self-evident. I then became crypto curious in 2014, and then it later led to me leaving my career after finishing my master's when it became very obvious. I've experienced a very steep learning curve as an early skeptic of the magic internet money, or nerd money as you so eloquently put it, before turning an adopter, analysis enthusiast, and now I've landed a position as an ambassador with the Open Port and OEL Foundation Alliance projects.
Great, that's quite a journey.
You yourself, sir?
We've both been on the similar journey.
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think we have very many similar touch points, and I relate to your experiences as you speak about them. So speaking of, you're currently on your sixth obsession of life. Would you mind articulating that a little bit?
Yeah, so as someone who's a geek and gets very enthusiastic about technology, I've had these moments in my life where I get into technology and it consumes me entirely, and I have these glimpses of how it's going to unfold in the future, and gradually I've developed more experience with that, and as a result I've become more and more confident in appreciating how technology unfolds in the world.
Very good. And it's led to you authoring several books, including The Internet of Money, Volumes 1 and 2, which I just finished the last couple days in preparation for this. Excellent. I left you a really good review on Amazon as well.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you. In addition, Mastering Bitcoin and Mastering Ethereum that recently came out, correct?
Mastering Ethereum is not out yet. It's in the final stages of tech editing. It's expected by the end of the year.
All right, good. We get to shill that book before it comes out. So those who need to get their learn on, get ready. As well as you've produced hundreds of hours of YouTube interviews and speeches that range from the very basics to cutting edge technical, and I'll post those links to some of my favorites in the show notes afterwards.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, sir. So other than addressing some of the very basic fundamentals for context, I would like to attempt to tackle some industry specific questions.
Sure.
I sourced questions from my friends. Not every day you get to question a legend in the industry, and so I tried to find new questions that maybe haven't been asked before. Some of them will. The first one being, this is a nascent and emerging technology that you continually state not to underestimate, as most did with the internet in 1991. My mate Todd states that when he's trying to explain this topic, he feels as though he's pointing to the moon, and most often people are left staring at his finger. Do you experience the same frustration?
Absolutely. But again, going back to the topic we touched on earlier about the 6 previous times in my life that this has happened, it's no different than when I had to explain the internet in 1989. It's no different than when I had to explain my fascination with modems and bulletin board systems in 1986. It's no different than when I told everyone how fascinating programming was in 1982. I had even less credibility then because I was 11 years old. But the bottom line is that is in the nature of every new technology. There's this convergence that needs to happen, and the convergence happens on both ends. On the one hand, as the technology matures and is developed, a lot of the complexity and detail gets hidden in the background, and just disappears. Like, you walk around today and your phone is magically connecting to TCP/IP services from cellular or Wi-Fi, running VPNs and things like that. You don't even know that's going on. The first time you set up a TCP/IP connection in 1989, for example, you absolutely know you're doing that because it takes hours and a lot of skill and experience. So a lot of things then just become transparent, right? Compare sending your first email, for example, maybe you sent one in the early 90s or late 90s, compared to sending it today, or using a computer. And so technology is about taking complexity and detail and hiding it behind intuitive user interfaces that allow us to relate to the technology on a human level, to anticipate what it's going to do intuitively, and the technology actually does what we anticipate. So one part is that. The other part is a change in the culture. So as the technology is coming closer to us, we're getting closer to technology. In 1989, when you said to someone, when you talked about TCP/IP or the internet, the whole concept was confusing because most people weren't really even using personal computers outside of work yet. We didn't have mobile computers. In the, let's say, early 2000s, trying to explain to someone who's not tech familiar, HTTP:// is just too much, right? Too complicated. There's this fantastic segment from an ABC show or CBS show where they're talking about what is the internet, and they're trying to wrap their heads around it in the early 90s, and they're like, is the internet the thing?
Is that email?
Or is that, no, that's email, and so is it the www? It's hilarious, right?
Right,
and it's
absolutely.
just misconceptions piled on top. Now, so today, those concepts have become part of our culture, and they're transparent to us. Everybody knows what the web is. Everybody anticipates that the internet is available wherever they might be, and new words enter the vocabulary, right? To Google something, and of course, that convergence makes things approachable. At first, all technology seems curious, magical, weird, and insane. You should see some of the cartoons they wrote about electrification of homes, a century and a half ago, and the terror that gripped people, that the idea that you would have this liquid fire that went through pipes in the walls of your house. I mean, gas was dangerous enough. Why would you combine it with this other ethereal thing? So, that's just a stepping stone. We will get there.
Thank you. But plus now we have the advantage of the existing infrastructure of the internet, correct? That we get to lay this upon. So hopefully the acceleration, as you said, internet took about 20 years in one of your speeches from when you said you used to write on Linux code, and then now your mother can swipe with a finger the email.
Yes, and look at where we are today, even with cryptocurrencies. People don't use them. Not many people use cryptocurrencies, but remarkably now, just almost 10 years after the introduction of Bitcoin into the world, people have heard of it. Almost everyone I talk to in the West has heard of it, and a lot of people in many countries in the developing world have heard of it too. So, we're beginning to enter popular consciousness. You see it mentioned on TV shows, and people discuss it and things like that. So we're already making that progress.
Absolutely, and as you outlined in your book, it also, Gresham's law applies, and it's a good currency which leaves the market. So it was a good argument that I got to use with my friend, and he was saying, how come I'm not seeing people use cryptocurrency? And the answer I had at the time was lack of adoption, and you're in a country where you don't need that so much. You are privileged banker.
Which is also true, of course.
but of course, we're in the early stages. So that leads me to my next question. And as money has evolved from feathers and shells to gold and silver, then to paper, and then plastic credit cards, Phylogenics has now delivered the network form, or Internet of Money. Again, Schilling the book there. In your Singularity University speech in 2016, you addressed the concept of decentralization applied to human communication of value. Could you please help articulate the significance of that with respect to the basics of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
Well, it starts with understanding what money is at a very basic level, and how important trust is when it comes to money. And money effectively is a form of communication. It allows us to communicate value, but it only works if you can trust that the money is real. And we have a number of ways of doing that. In terms of physical money, you have various techniques to protect against forgery, so that an individual with a bit of skill can independently verify that the money they're holding is in fact real, which has been a battle over centuries to, an arms race between forgers and currency makers to stay one step ahead. And then in the more modern digital forms of money, we have like checking accounts and wire transfers and credit cards and debit cards and things like that, and PayPal and Venmo, etc. What we're using in order to have trust in the money system is central institutions. And these central institutions amass enormous power. And until 2009, until the introduction of Bitcoin, the only way we could have trust is through the introduction of a central institution. What these cryptocurrencies have done is they've allowed us to take communication of value, take it onto the internet, where we can communicate rapidly across borders at very low cost, and essentially make the cost of the transmission of money near zero, make the cost of the use of money and payment systems near zero, while maintaining something that is rare and cannot be changed, as we've seen with Bitcoin, and of course the other cryptocurrencies that have emerged after that, which are following the same model. The end result is that now we can do the same thing. We can have trust without a central institution. So you take this communication of value, you make it super cheap, super efficient, instantaneous, and completely global. And at the same time, you're not vesting enormous power in a centralized institution. Instead, you're taking away that power and you're making it a completely decentralized form of currency, just like the internet is a decentralized form of communication for the most part. And that opens up tremendous opportunities.
Well, that leads me quite well into the next question. And pursuant to your presentation recently at Panachain conference, as well as chapters 5, 6, and 8 of volume 2 of Internet of Money, have you yet signed the Declaration of Currency Independence on the blockchain, which was introduced to me thanks to my boy Peter at Decentralized TV and Blake at currencyindependence.com?
I have not, and part of the reason I have not is I avoid making these endorsements or public declarations like that, which require people to sign on who are influencers or leaders or whatever, because I'm focused on the technology and I'm not interested in any kind of leadership or influencer position. So I generally don't go for those kinds of schemes. It's fun to read, and it doesn't mean that I don't believe in the principles therein. But distilling all my ideas and my personal worldview, and subscribing to something that can be replicated with lots of other people and putting a signature below, not really my thing. Very, very useful in the 17th century and the 18th century. Declarations, not so useful now. Very few people have pulled it off. The last one I think pulled it off well was John Perry Barlow.
Okay, you're pro net neutrality.
I'm very much pro net neutrality and decentralized communication in general.
And I guess the technology in itself is the declaration. So
exactly, no declarations needed, and you don't need anybody to sign on to it. Every one of us who chooses to use the system is making their own personal declaration, and it's a very practical one because they're choosing to extract themselves from the current economic system endorse and use this new economy, opt out of the old to opt into the new. And that's much more powerful than any piece of paper you might sign.
Agreed. Thank you. When people are trying to grasp this new concept of the blockchain, I think it's often and intentionally overcomplicated. It can be argued that writing was invented in order to track money itself, and the first blockchain perhaps was a scroll or scrolls of papyrus, sequentially numbered at the bottom with 1 of X, 2 of X, etc., in order for ancient dudes to be able to know who owed them what. Could you please help explain more in layman's terms the blockchain, as you stated before?
So interestingly enough,
replicated database.
Yes, so interestingly enough, the word blockchain has been overloaded primarily because it's attracted a lot of attention from investors. So people use it as a general band-aid to make their company sound more valuable and to raise money, which causes the word to lose all meaning because they're using it to apply to things that have nothing to do with the original conception. In the original conception, the technology that invented this was Bitcoin, and in 2009 was launched. And Bitcoin works by using, among other things, among other technologies, a blockchain. And what a blockchain is a decentralized database or data structure that stores all of the transactions that have ever happened and can be independently verified by everyone using software that runs on their own computer to independently verify the accuracy of the blockchain and arrive at a common truth, if you like, a trusted set of information every 10 minutes. And this technology, essentially, blockchain is the artifact. Blockchain is the ledger that is produced. The interesting thing about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and what people term blockchain technologies in general is how the blockchain is produced. Because the blockchain itself isn't a particularly interesting data structure. What's interesting is the mechanism by which the blockchain is produced. So if you think of it as an artifact, what is the creation mechanism? And the creation mechanism is this decentralized competition, which involves reward through a currency that's intrinsic to the system, or other mechanisms like that. It's called a consensus algorithm, which allows all of these participants who are participating on the network with their computers communicating over the network to arrive at the same conclusion at approximately the same time, or eventually arrive at the same conclusion of what is contained within the blockchain. So you can say after 6 blocks have been recorded, the information 6 blocks ago is considered now accepted by everyone involved. So you can eventually arrive at this synchronous view, this trusted and synchronous view of the ledger. So the blockchain is the artifact. Excellent. It's one of many technologies used within the cryptocurrency blockchain space. It's not as important as the consensus algorithm, which decides how the blockchain is created. And there are a few other technologies involved in that whole thing too, including, for example, public key cryptography, which is digital signatures in order to validate the authenticity and ownership of funds that are recorded on the ledger, as well as peer-to-peer technology to communicate between disparate computers spread around the world.
Thank you. Yes, and that was leading into my next question as far as highlighted principles that you made important distinctions on, that blockchain is not in itself facilitating the Bitcoin as people like to project, but more one of 4 principles, that 3 of which you discussed: peer-to-peer networks, cryptography, blockchain, and then
consensus.
Proof of work.
Yeah.
Consensus.
And it doesn't have to be. It doesn't necessarily have to be proof of work. We just haven't invented yet an algorithm that operates at scale to deliver the same level of trust. But there's a lot of research going on in alternative consensus algorithms. The most important thing to realize here is that what's interesting about the blockchain is that it is created in a decentralized manner, which means no one is in charge. And a lot of people use the term blockchain to describe creating the same data structure by giving the right to record that information to, say, a group of 8 companies or a dozen individuals or computers. And then if you do that, then you lose all of the interesting properties. It's no longer decentralized. It's no longer neutral. It's no longer censorship resistant, and it's no longer immutable. The interesting thing about the consensus algorithm that's used in Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies as well is that it allows you to have a blockchain without giving anyone control over that blockchain. So you have that recording of the ledger of all transactions, but no one can modify it, and no one can take power or control over it. So it spreads the power very evenly so that all of the participants play a small role, but it accumulates a lot of that power in the network rather than a single individual or organization. So decentralization is the word we use to describe that concept of diffusing power among many participants. And decentralization is one of the most important principles of these systems, because it's what gives us many of the other properties. So if only one person is in charge, it's no longer decentralized, but that also means it's no longer censorship resistant, because that one person can censor. They can remove transactions they don't like, apply blacklists, etc. It's no longer neutral because that one party can change the rules. It's no longer borderless because that one party is in one jurisdiction and will be subject to the laws of that jurisdiction, and therefore will have to limit transactions. It's no longer open because by law they will have to vet participants of the system. So you lose all of those principles. But if you have thousands of participants, and they're spread around the world, and they're mostly anonymous, and they're difficult to find and coerce and do all of these other things, then no one of them, or even a coalition of them, can change the past, so it's immutable. They can't decide to allow certain transactions and disallow others, so it's censorship resistant. They can't change the rules, so it's neutral. They can't restrict to specific countries or jurisdictions, so it's borderless. And anyone can participate, so it's open. And these principles make it really exciting. That's what it's all about.
Let them eat mud cakes and become anti-fragile, as Nassim Taleb states, correct?
Yes, indeed.
So, and one of the cautionary tales that you pick up, or I picked up on you, is basically a lot of companies are taking blockchain and trying to give it a haircut and dress it in a suit. And so the permissionless system is important in order to maintain that censorship resistant, as well as not becoming...
Of course. I mean, because, if you look at it from a different perspective, we're talking about a financial industry that represents $100 trillion worth of wealth that is being disrupted by a new revolutionary technology. And this is one they can't buy, they can't sue, they can't shut down, they can't make illegal, they can't stop, which is new for them, because so far they've managed in the past to either use the regulators who have fully captured or their cartel power to shut down competition, to sue, put out of business, regulate out of existence, make too expensive, etc., all of their competition. So this is new. And so as a result, what they're trying to do is co-opt, embrace. And so they pretend to embrace the concept of blockchain, and they're like, what can we use blockchain to do in order to maintain business as usual? How can we make blockchain do what we want to do, maintain cartel power, closed systems, control, and avoid competition while calling it blockchain? And so, this influx of companies have come into the space, and there are many, many consultants who are happy to accept millions of dollars to say, sure, we can build you a fully functional blockchain that gives you everything that they say they have with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, only will keep you in control, will allow you to keep doing business as usual. That thing doesn't exist, but they're still going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars pursuing that unicorn. Meanwhile, the real cryptocurrencies, the real decentralized systems continue to grow and gain in interest and acceptance, especially in countries where the financial industry cartel is extremely powerful or extremely corrupt, or both.
I believe that summarizes the initial contextualization for those who are perhaps unfamiliar, and I'd like to move into some more of the industry-specific items.
Sure.
For reference to our audience, IBM has invested over $200 million USD into blockchain technology and formed massive partnerships with major players such as Maersk Shipping. One of my favorite scholars, if you will, Dr. Peter Diamandis, former head of Google X Prize and co-founder of Singularity University, preaches the 6 Ds of technology distribution that include digitization, disruption, demonetization, dematerialization, democratization, and finally, not to be underestimated, is the deceptiveness in terms of its innovation appearing linear, when in fact it's the precipice of being exponential on a global scale. Would you agree?
I'd add 7, decentralization, but that's a new one on the block. So yes, I'm very interested in all of those concepts.
Excellent. And for complementing that, in 2018, an Insight study titled "Creative Destruction is Accelerating." It outlines that S&P Fortune 500 companies used to maintain an average lifespan of 34 years, and now that's dwindling to 12 years, with a prediction that 50% of the existing companies are going to be replaced in the next 10 years. I believe this serves as a warning and opportunity to the maritime industry, who have been traditionally very conservative, as the penalty for failure is extreme in this environment. The industry will need to find ways to disrupt itself while still maintaining these safety factors. So I'd ask, how would you say that organizations in this sector both position and participate in this technology, and what will happen if they don't?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult. You know, you use the term that I've heard a lot, especially from the Silicon Valley culture, which is disrupt themselves.
Oh no.
Disrupt themselves from the inside. I have yet to see a successful example in history of an industry disrupting itself. And in fact, what happens is industries find it extremely difficult to not only to innovate internally, because innovation doesn't happen at scale. When you get too large, innovation stops. So then, in order to continue to innovate, they have to acquire innovation from outside. And that's very difficult, because every time the innovative company is acquired, it gets smothered and suffocated internally. And all of the incumbent industries and traditions work against any form of change. So it's like, to use a maritime example, it's like trying to turn a giant 100,000 ton tanker 45 degrees to port. Yeah, it's going to do it about 8 miles out from here, but it's never going to be able to turn as fast as a tugboat. And so, and that's why you need the tugboats. So the bottom line here is that incumbent industries find it very difficult to innovate, because innovating means changing course, and changing course means dealing with inertia and momentum and established tradition and restrictions and policies and regulations. The best advice I can give is that the essence of these new technologies is relinquishing control. It's relinquishing control in order to allow decentralized applications and systems to operate, that operate across the industry, that cannot be controlled by your own company. And that if someone's trying to sell you this in a way that will preserve your control, they're lying, and that won't be innovative. What's disruptive is relinquishing control. And of course, because that's disruptive, disruptive doesn't mean innovative. Disruptive means it ruins your existing business. And it ruins your existing model. And people say, let's adopt some disruption. Disruption is painful. You don't adopt it. It happens to you at great resistance. And so in the case of a large corporation, or in the maritime industry or oil and gas industry, et cetera, you have these large corporations. And the essence of the corporation is to control their operations, to control their systems, to control their cash flow, to control their pipelines, to control their inputs, their outputs, their internal processes, their employees, et cetera. And the essence of this new technology is the antithesis of all of that, because it's about decentralization. So, adapting to these requires companies to let go of control, perhaps slowly at first, and then increasingly faster as they see emerging competitors come from entirely outside their own industry, who are based on completely novel and weird principles, like not having employees, or not having products, or various other things that we see. Like, if you're a taxi driver and you're competing against Uber. The problem is that they don't own any taxis. You know, the world's largest taxi company has no taxis. The world's largest hotel, Airbnb, has no rooms. The world's largest content company, Facebook, has no content of its own, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are in some ways elements of decentralization, but it's getting even more radical because all of these are companies that have a central focus. And what these new models of decentralization are creating is tearing apart even that. It's going to be very difficult to adapt, honestly.
Understood. And as a former regulatory compliance officer, I wonder, are these systems going to serve as that regulatory compliance and governance protocol? Does it put companies that serve that function out of business, or act as an additional tool in which they can now focus on more important functions, such as, in my previous experience, I had to do a lot of paperwork, which was undermining to my ability to go out and actually survey a ship or oil rig, which in my opinion was more important, but in a legalistic society, the focus and emphasis is on report and traceability.
I mean, that's a really interesting thing, because if you hear and read what people are writing about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, they'll say the system is unregulated. And when they say that, it's really striking because unregulated sounds like it's chaotic, like it has no rules. And yet these systems apply the strictest of rules under highly deterministic and predictable models. And those rules can't be changed by anyone. So they're very regulated. They're very regulated by mathematics and by rules that cannot be changed without a massive supermajority of the participants. They're the most regulated in terms of having regular outcomes and deterministic outcome systems we've ever constructed using internet technology. And so they will disrupt regulators themselves, because really when people say they're not regulated, what they're saying is they're not regulated by institutions. They're not regulated by committees. They're regulated by algorithms. They're regulated by mathematics. And if you have algorithmic and mathematic regulation, one of the reasons people like cryptocurrencies is that it removes ambiguity. If I have a payment that the regulator objects to, or there's some ambiguity in the regulation, that payment may not go through. My money may get seized, frozen, or confiscated, right? Whereas when you're using a cryptocurrency, if you have a well-formed transaction that follows the rules, it will go through, and absolutely no one on this planet can stop it. And that gives you a level of certainty. There's no ambiguity there. There's no possibility of your competitors capturing the regulator and changing the rules from under you and making it disadvantageous. There's no opportunity of the regulator changing the rules for political reasons to affect competition in an industry or other things like that. And so as a result, cryptocurrencies very much disrupt regulators themselves. Not only are they not going to be regulated by institutions, they're going to out-regulate regulators and make them, in many cases, obsolete because they offer more certainty.
And as you say in your book, the opposite of authoritarianism in this circumstance is not chaos, but rather autonomy.
Yes, absolutely. These are autonomous systems that give you much more order without having authority.
Excellent. You yourself are a private pilot, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You've previously stressed in the importance, in one of your speeches where you mentioned that the provenance or origins and chain of custody, quality assurance, etc., for aircraft parts and maintenance records can and should be stored on the blockchain in an immutable fashion. Mm-hmm. Could you please help our audience better understand this in practical use cases, how they can become tamper evident and or tamper proof?
Yeah, so one of the advantages you can have with an open public blockchain, and you can pick any from a whole range of them that exist today, is that you can record not data itself, but you can record the digital fingerprint or signature of data in such a way that you can't modify the data without it being noticed. So what you can do is you can leverage or use the immutability capability, the immutability feature of blockchain in order to make records that you store in the real world or in another database immutable. And what you do is, for example, let's say you're an aircraft mechanic, right? And you perform maintenance or discover a crack, right? Well, in some countries, the fact that you discover a crack is going to cost the airline far too much money to fix. So they want you to tear that report up and never record it. Or if something happens later, they might go back and remove that from the report to avoid embarrassment. So there's no way really to protect the integrity of that information. It's often stored on paper, and these paper logs are modifiable. If it's stored in a database, even worse, because then you can modify them without any trace of anything have changed. Now, if instead you take a database record that says, today I did maintenance on this, yesterday I found a crack or whatever, and you take these reports and you get a digital fingerprint, and then you record that digital fingerprint on an immutable blockchain, it can't be changed. And so after the fact, the report may have disappeared, but there will be a record that a report happened, and it will have a fingerprint. So someone will have to explain why that report disappeared. And you can't change that report. If the report is modified, the fingerprint will change, and therefore it won't match the original submission. And so that gives you both proof of existence of a record and the proof of point in time, that it was on or before a certain date. You can't fix it afterwards. That's going to be really useful for all kinds of applications where you need trusted, verifiable logs of activities that have happened. Transitions in custody or ownership, verification of records, or various audits, engineering, certification of quality, ship logs, et cetera, et cetera. And how do we do that in the past? How we did it in the past was we recorded that with a trusted institution, and the trusted institution or certified professional or certified organization, their job is to use the institutional process to bring trust, and with legal penalties if they don't. Well, it's a lot more efficient if you use a blockchain, because you get the same result, which is that nothing can be modified, but you don't have the institution, you don't have the possibility of corruption, the institution doesn't have power over its participants, and you have verifiability by everyone. So you also have transparency and openness. Anyone can go and look at these records and verify them for themselves without having to make a request.
I think that's phenomenally revolutionary and shall increase safety margins and factors exponentially, I hope.
Yes, but here's the catch. Almost everyone I've seen trying to apply this is thinking about creating their own private blockchain in order to record these things. And the moment they do that, they lost the immutability, they lost the neutrality, the censorship resistance, the openness, and the access. So all of those things went away. So all of the principles they were trying to get from this technology disappear when they tried to make a closed private version of their own. And part of the reason they want to make a closed private version of their own is because they want to have control over it, thinking that control will make it more trustworthy, when in fact the trust exists precisely because no one has control in it. And that leap of faith, saying, I will relinquish control over this process, we will record it in a public blockchain where we ourselves cannot change it, no one can change it in fact, we have no control over that public blockchain, it's outside of our system. But that's what will make it trustworthy, precisely because we relinquish control. That's the leap of faith, and it's a very difficult one to make.
Well, with respect to your reference to the construction of pyramids and having been part of a team that delivered new construction of oil rigs or mobile offshore drilling units, proof of work is something I feel the audience will appreciate. Can you help explain?
So proof of work is using energy as a mechanism to stake the result of your work so that you can prove that your calculations should be trusted. And the way it works, for example, in Bitcoin is this. Certain participants in the network decide to validate transactions and record them in the blockchain. Everybody validates transactions, but these participants, which we call miners, record their results and attempt to participate in the competition for creating the blockchain. And in order to do that, they have to have something at stake. And what they have at stake is energy. energy. So they do this complicated calculation that burns electricity because there's only one way to do it. It can only be made so efficient, and at some point it's just a simple matter of this many kilowatts out, this much work proof you can produce, and they stake as much energy as they can in order to prove that they're willing to do the security right. And the reason they're willing to do the security right is because of game theory. If they do the security right and everybody accepts the block as valid because everybody's validating it according to the rules that everybody is following, then they get a reward, and that reward is in the form of the currency intrinsic to the blockchain. If they fail to validate the rules correctly and they include a transaction that's invalid, or they break some of the other rules of validation, then they get nothing. But they've already spent all of the electricity doing these calculations. And the system operates at this balance where the more people who participate, the harder it gets, so that very quickly it reaches a state of equilibrium where the profit margins get very, very thin. The most efficient of companies may make a 10-20% profit margin. It's not clear really how much profit they make, but it's pretty thin. And the rest they spend on electricity. Even when they win, they spend on electricity. But if they lose because they didn't validate the security, then the penalty is extremely high because they still have to pay for the electricity, but they didn't actually get a reward in Bitcoin to make up 80% of that. So that balance is how the trust mechanism works in proof of work cryptocurrencies, the ones that use a consensus algorithm called proof of work. And the use of energy shocks some people because why use energy if there's a better way to do it? And the reason is there's not a better way to do it. All other ways either put the power in one centralized institution, or they create a situation where if it's cheap to do it, then there's nothing at stake, then therefore it's cheap to cheat, and therefore you don't have security anymore. What's interesting is that this is a very transparent use of energy, so you can see how much energy is being used by the system, and that draws a lot of criticism. But the good point is that, in fact, this is a system that is neutral to what type of energy is used and where that energy is produced. So you can use renewable energy, you can use alternative sources of energy, you can use energy produced in places where they have limited distribution ability and excess capacity. In fact, those are the places that will attract mining operations because they will be able to deliver the lowest price of energy. So it creates an energy arbitration market that encourages the use of alternative, renewable, and easily distributed excess energy. So once you understand all of these, it's a rather complicated economy. It's an industrial infrastructure, a rather complicated economy. But what it does, in very simple terms, is it buys you security without anybody being in charge.
Complicated, I think, is a stark underestimation. Right.
You should let me talk to you about internet routing, a thing that you've been using for a decade or two, and yet if you explained internet routing to most people, they would have no idea how it works. It's very, very complicated, mind-blowingly complex, in fact, but it all happens in the background and you don't need to know about it in order to use the internet. And the same thing applies to these cryptocurrencies. You don't need to understand these internals of the system in order to understand why it works and for it to work for you.
The routed payment channels chapter I found extremely intriguing, but I needed to go on to about 2 more beers before I think my brain started to comprehend it, and then it departed me quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it took me 6 months to understand those concepts myself while speaking to the actual people who wrote the white paper and developed that technology, and having the ability to ask them questions. So yeah, and there's a lot of complex technology, but here's the interesting thing. Technology is about hiding complexity, and you know, think about an aircraft that you fly to get somewhere. And there's unimaginable complexity in there in terms of the jet engines, just to say one thing, or the avionics, or the air traffic control system, etc. You just sit down in your seat and order a Bloody Mary. And there's a whole cadre of professionals who are making sure that that all works. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't investigate or learn about or have intellectual curiosity about the technology. Quite the opposite. I mean, I'm fascinated by that. But what I'm saying is you don't need to have it in order to be able to utilize the technology.
Thank you. In your book, Volume 2, Internet of Money, you caution about the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, if I got that correctly. Can you please provide details on what exactly you might have been warning about and insights on how the other alliances can form without making similar mistakes?
Well, I think this is one of the things that's happened a few times in this space, which is that companies form around this new technology, and they try to mold it to their own needs. They really want to do business as usual with maximum innovation. And of course, innovation is about not doing business as usual. So as they form around these systems, eventually they discover that they don't control it and it's not doing what they want it to do, and they can't actually change it. That happened with Bitcoin. And, at first there were a lot of companies that were interested in looking at that technology, but then they got scared off because they realized that it could be used to do things that they found unsavory. And they couldn't control it or stop it. So they moved to, we're not interested in Bitcoin, we're interested in blockchain. And then, more specifically, more interested in Ethereum. They haven't yet figured out that Ethereum can also be used, in fact, will very likely be used to do things that they find unsavory, and can do so very effectively, and they can't control that either. At that point, they're going to distance themselves from Ethereum and say things like, we're not into Ethereum, we're into smart contracts. And they keep advancing that way. That is exactly the retrenchment that happens when disruption happens in an industry, right? So look at exactly what happened with phone companies when they were faced with the internet. They were like, yeah, I mean, we understand that these academics are running all of these packet switch networks, but we're kind of interested in packet switch networks, but closed packet switch networks that we control. And we want to do video telephony and various things like that, and offer them to consumers at the cheap price of $99 a minute for video calls or something like that. And then the internet starts doing unsavory things. People use it for porn or use it for trivialities or whatever. And they think this is unsavory, so they make closed systems. Like, do you remember AOL and CompuServe before they opened up?
Yes.
And again, this repeats. I remember a time when it was absolutely forbidden to connect to the internet from inside any mature, responsible, and serious corporation, because the internet was full of weirdos. And it was out there, and it was, no, we have corporate networks that IBM has specifically delivered to us that connect us to our affiliates and partners, and they have all of the interesting things we'll ever need to access. Turns out they didn't have all of the interesting things. All of those were on the internet. And so these disruptive technologies, what they do is they push incumbents to keep retrenching and backing away. And as they back away, the disruptive technology gobbles up more ground because it's open, because it has this possibility of doing things that are unanticipated, and that's where the innovation lies. But of course, that scares traditional incumbents in corporate environments. This is a game that's been going on forever. This is the exact same thing that happened when whale oil was being displaced by dirty petroleum. It's the same thing that happened when candle wax was being displaced by electric lighting, where horse buggies were being displaced by automobiles, and when the internet displaced telephones. All of the, and then TV and newspapers and a few other things. And all of these industries basically are backing away, going, you're too weird, and they're constantly backing up like that until eventually they run out of anywhere to go, and then they get bought by what used to be one of these silly companies from the new disruptive technology. Mark my words, in a decade we will see cryptocurrency companies buying banks. buying banks to discard all of their traditional business, and maybe to keep a few little items on the line.
I wait for that. That should be fun and
Well,
interesting.
it's just like
it's a brave new
AOL
world.
buying Time Warner, right?
Right. That was unprecedented at the time.
And Comcast buying, what did they buy? HBO or whoever they bought lately. Yeah.
Right. Everything. Yes. Can you help our audience understand decentralized applications and how they need to be structured atop of proof of work protocols such as Bitcoin versus solely on, say, a proof of stake?
Well, I don't necessarily know that they only need to be on proof of work versus proof of stake. It's just that proof of stake isn't yet as mature or proven. In fact, interestingly enough, proof of stake predates proof of work. Proof of work was invented because proof of stake wasn't working at scale. Decentralized applications are applications that you use that look the same as the applications you use now. They may have web pages and websites, etc., where you do various things. Maybe you're using an auction site to buy and sell things, or you're using a site to post content or consume content. But the main difference is no one's in control. So there's not a company behind that has the servers, which are centralized, or the content, or runs the application or sets the rules. Instead, the software itself is open source. The servers are distributed around the world and are run by the participants in the network in a peer-to-peer fashion. The data is recorded in various decentralized storage and data stores, and the rules are controlled by a blockchain so that they cannot be modified. The advantage of this is that it gives people platforms that are open, decentralized, neutral, borderless, censorship resistant. Now, what kind of apps would you need those things? Because the disadvantage is that these decentralized apps are horribly inefficient. They're slower, they're much more expensive to run, they need more resources, but instead they give you, in return, they give you freedom. And so the question is, what kind of applications do we need those for? There aren't that many. Currency is the obvious one, a decentralized application of currency, payment systems, and those are because there are too many restrictions, rules, and limitations that leave the vast majority of the world unbanked and disconnected from international commerce. Illegal activities are an obvious application of decentralized markets, and whether you like it or not, we are going to see decentralized markets that sell narcotics and sex and porn and things like that, because those things have been traded even before humans were humans.
Right.
Even monkeys trade those things. So it's hardly surprising that this new technology is also going to be used to trade some of the oldest products that have ever existed. We're not going to be the first species to stop getting high. No matter how much morality we dump on top. And so those things are going to be decentralized applications because they need open, borderless, decentralized, neutral, and censorship-resistant operation. But the interesting thing is what happens when you apply this to some of the content industries. For example, Facebook. You know, we all talk about how Facebook has become super powerful, and they're using their platform to data mine our personal lives, sell that out to surveillance agencies, companies, advertising companies, and then to, on top of that, manipulate elections, manipulate democracy, destroy democracy in many cases. These are some serious problems that are now happening on massive scale. So the question is, do we need that to be decentralized? And is it worth the inefficiency cost to decentralize that? Do they have too much power? Everybody agrees they have too much power. The problem is most people haven't figured out that there is an answer, and the answer is decentralize that application. If you decentralize that application, they don't have that power anymore. Nobody does, because the participants themselves cumulatively hold that power. So those are some categories where freedom is important, where these principles of decentralization are important to protect these platforms. And who knows what else? Voting is another decentralized application that is easily corrupted. The entire political governance process, arguably, is the same. But there are many industries that can happen on a decentralized basis where you don't need intermediaries, where the purpose of the intermediary today is to provide trust between two partners who are trading with each other but don't trust each other. And what the blockchain technology has proven is that you can do that with technology without an institution, without an intermediary, and you can do it more efficiently in terms of speed and security and cost of transaction, even though it might not be as efficient as the centralized institution. It also gives you freedom.
The last few questions. Given your insights, do you have any insights on tokenomics, token generating events, ICOs, and their importance or unimportance to the evolving crypto economy? Perhaps any best practices for those launching or advice for potential investors?
Yeah, tokens are a touchy subject because this space has exploded over the last 2 years, and with it, it's drawn all kinds of opportunists who are using this to enrich themselves. So you have to reconcile these two concepts. On the one hand, tokens and initial offerings and this model for crowdfunding a startup without venture capital, without bank loans, but instead by essentially selling these tokens to the users directly, whether they're utility tokens that are used to purchase the services, kind of like reward cards or credit cards, or whether they're security tokens, which are really intended to work as equity. They have dividends of voting power, participatory in the corporation that's launching them or the organization that's launching them. Regardless of what form they take, they're a revolutionary way of crowdfunding and also reimagining the modern startup funding process, and the modern corporation. Great, groundbreaking stuff. It's going to disrupt venture capital. It's going to disrupt business loans. It's going to disrupt startups. It's going to disrupt the very nature of the corporation. But you've got to hold that in your head while at the same time recognizing that 99.9% of the things that are on offer today are utter and complete bullshit. And they're going to fail and people are going to lose their money because you've suddenly opened up this space. There are effectively no rules in who can qualify, and that's not a bad thing. The problem is that the investors are not prepared for this. They're used to investing in things that are carefully vetted. And the problem with that is that it limits the number of investors who can participate. And a certain class of investors get enormous gains, as we've seen again and again. That's part of the reason you have this massive inequality, especially in the United States, by participating in these schemes that the vast majority of the public is not capable of participating in. But at the same time, they also...
Or allowed,
yeah. And at the same time, they're not... They limit the number of startups that can seek funding this way. Very, very limited. And so, that broke. And the problem is when it broke, it created this situation where it was a free-for-all. And investors have not yet developed the analytical tools, the skills, the knowledge, the education to deal with this. Now, the easy answer is, let's just regulate it, and the regulators will sort the good from the bad. But the problem is the regulators failed to sort the good from the bad. The regulators thought Bernie Madoff was good. The regulators thought Enron was good. And at the same time, the cost of having that regulator decide the good from the bad is scale, because that means only a few investors can participate and only a few startups can participate. That's the system we're attempting to disrupt, or is being disrupted by this technology. So instead, we have to think about new ways of dealing with this. And of course, underlying all of this is the simple truth that the only way to protect investors is education. You can't outsource that decision-making to a regulator, because the regulator themselves become captured, corrupt, and make mistakes. And that has enormous repercussions because you somehow think you can trust them because they put the stamp of approval, and that's how you get your Bernie Madoffs and your Ponzi's.
Right. Excellent. Well, speaking of Birdie Manoffs and Ponzi's or other corrupt entities being involved, what is going on with the current Bitcoin market? It seems that the price keeps bouncing off the resistance and support levels. Is this manipulation, or are we experiencing the calm before the storm in reference to trillions of dollars being injected via institutional money?
Yeah, I'm not that interested in the finance and investment side of this. Honestly, you've got to understand that this is a nascent technology, and the result of it being open in a worldwide market where people can trade it is going to be massive volatility. This is still brand new. And as a result of it being open for everyone in the world to trade it, it bounces up and down like crazy. It's a complete roller coaster. And so that doesn't mean you can't have it as part of an investment portfolio, but you have to be aware of the risk and volatility. You have to have the appetite for that, and it has to be an appropriate percentage of your portfolio. The bottom line, of course, is that if you look at the long-term trends, it's doing pretty fine. I mean, it's up 250% year on year. In the meantime, it did some swings that were pretty incredible. But overall, not so bad for long-term investors. But you have to take the long-term perspective here. And a lot of people have been burned by trying to play this market like a casino. And the problem is because volatility itself is a trigger. People who have tendency to gamble get triggered by volatility, and they gamble. And that's not good. So I don't know what's happening with the market. It's not, manipulation. I think all of the people who are screaming manipulation now, where were you in December? Where were you in December when it was rising $1,000 a day, screaming, this isn't good, it's manipulation of the markets? Silent. Everyone was, woohoo, let's get some Lambos, which is ridiculous, right? This is the two-sided thing. Everybody's now looking for manipulation because it's not going the way they like it. But the truth is, you can ascribe the exact same dynamics to the decline now that you could ascribe to the rise in December. That was high volatility. This is high volatility. There's no qualitative difference to it. And in fact, we have lower volatility now. It's not going as crazy as it was back in December, but nobody complains about volatility when it's in that direction. So, I'm very skeptical of these claims of market manipulation. But then again, these are very, very small markets. It doesn't take much to move them rapidly. So I wouldn't be surprised. The answer to market manipulation is really, again, quite simple. More bigger markets, more market participants, more liquidity means less opportunity for manipulation or problems like that.
Agreed. Even all the other markets are being manipulated, so it's nothing new to humanity or society or markets in general, I'd say. In your book, you say that there probably isn't any biologists in the audience, but in fact, my buddy Garoff, who was a contributor for Mastering Bitcoin, is one, and wanted your opinion on what the true Bitcoin chain was. With respect to phylogenetics and the numerous Bitcoin chain forks, i.e. Cash, Core, Gold, etc., being children of those coins which remain in Satoshi's original wallet, isn't that the true Bitcoin, and can that be used to purchase or use in other wallets that are children of that chain fork? And how would you refer to that original Bitcoin sitting in Satoshi's wallet?
I think the general idea that there is one singular truth that applies to everyone is faulty in itself. So the real Bitcoin is whatever chain you are following. And I don't think that argument really matters. Which one works for you? Because, to use biology, which one fits into your niche? You have some environmental niche you're dealing with, some use case you're thinking of, some application you're thinking of. Which one works in that niche? And depending on what your niche is, what you're trying to achieve, what you think Bitcoin should be doing for you or any of the other chains out there, you will find one that meets those criteria. Who gets to use the name? That's not important. It's important only from a marketing perspective. and really the most effective technology should market itself. It shouldn't be up to name recognition per se. But I do understand why people get bitter and also possessive about names and claim to hold the one truth and all of that. As far as I'm concerned, Bitcoin is whatever your consensus rules say it is. You can run a client, and if that client follows one chain, that's the client you've chosen, that's the chain you've chosen. It's a participatory system. And at the same time, who am I to say what it is? I can only decide what chain I want to follow.
You're Andreas Antonopoulos.
Exactly, and that's exactly why people shouldn't listen to one person on what is Bitcoin. We're not doing that anymore. That's not the purpose of decentralization.
Yes, I see we're fragmented tribalistically. Once again, it's quite an interesting social experiment watching this, because some of the same rules apply no matter what.
Oh yeah, human nature doesn't change.
No, it certainly doesn't. My buddy Zach at Metabase wanted to know, are you currently involved in any projects? If yes, which? If no, why not?
Involved in any projects? I don't know what that means.
Any startups? Sorry, I should have specified more. Any startups or... I think you get the point.
No, I'm continuing my own work, which is writing books and doing education, videos, translations, etc. My work is enough of a project as it is. I'm running a startup. The startup is my educational companies, doing events, being supported by my supporters on Patreon, which is one of my major support sources, and makes it possible for me to do this work without economic strings attached and pressures to follow commercial leads and things like that. I can truly work for my audience, and so that's what I'm doing, creating video content, creating Q&A content, and writing books and investigating technology and trying to explain this incredible phenomenon, this incredible technology, to as many people as possible, of all levels of knowledge, education, and technical expertise, in as many languages as possible with the internationalization activities we've been doing. You know, just in the last year, we've had the videos on my channel translated into 27 languages, including more than 60 videos in Polish, more than 55 videos in Spanish, and you know, all of the languages have lots and lots of videos that people can access. So that's one of the big efforts I'm doing right now. In the meantime, my first book, Mastering Bitcoin, has been translated into 16 languages so far. I keep discovering new ones. People bring me books. Like in Poland recently, I went there, someone dumped Mastering Bitcoin in Polish on the desk for me to sign. I was like, I didn't even know this was published. This is fantastic.
That's cool. That's very cool.
We, with collaboration with various partners, we've translated Internet of Money Volume 1 so far into French, Korean, and Vietnamese. Those are out. Russian, Portuguese, and other languages are coming. We're working on translations for Internet of Money Volume 2 and new books. So plenty of work there. No need to jump into another project and another startup. I get asked about 5 times a day to support or endorse or promote an ICO or startup or coin or chain or whatever. In case you're wondering why you haven't received a response from me, I blocked you on the first email. So no, I don't do that.
Excellent. So what is the best way for people to get your engagement, reaching out to you? I guess I reached out to your website. Do you have preferred methods or channels for people?
Yeah, there's some forms on my website for people inviting me to conferences or requesting an interview, just as you did, which get screened by the far more organized members of my staff, because if you reach out to me directly, you are by definition speaking to the least organized person. That's not one of my strong points.
The irony.
Turns out, and you're more likely to get missed. But yeah, through my website for conferences and interviews, my Patreon page for support and early access to videos, behind the scenes, and live Q&A, which is, you know, a special perk for my Patreon supporters. And my YouTube channel, of course, and Twitter, where you can see the latest work I'm doing. We publish videos 3-4 times a week, new videos coming constantly, and yeah. Hopefully you'll find something of interest.
plenty of stuff there of interest. I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes so that everybody can get an opportunity to further expand their horizons with you.
Yeah, I just want to.
If you're out in Kuala Lumpur,
just want to point out
yes,
that mastering Bitcoin as well as mastering Ethereum are fully open source. Internet of Money Volume 2 and Volume 1 are based on open source videos. Open source means that these are free, not just free to read, free to share, free to mash up, free to commercialize, free to create derivative content, to translate, etc. All my videos on YouTube are Creative Commons Attribution License. You can turn it into a music video, you can animate it, you can have me narrating a video of dancing frogs. I don't know, whatever you want in Spanish or Armenian. So all of the work I do is open. It's open for people to freely enjoy, but also to use in creating more and exciting content. By all means, if you want to buy one of my books, go ahead. That's great. I appreciate it. Or support me on Patreon. But you can also enjoy this regardless of your financial situation.
Outstanding. You're a very generous individual, sir. I really appreciate your time.
Honestly,
if you can make it out
it's not generosity, it's practicality. Open source content gets further, educates more people in more languages, and I get the incredible collaboration. More than 1,000 people have collaborated on my various books, videos, and other content to make it better, to make it richer, to translate it, to improve it, to correct it. So it's a community process. It involves a very broad open source community. I come from open source software development, and to me it's a natural way of engaging with the world, especially when it comes to what they call intellectual property. The best way to get information out there is to spread it as freely and openly as possible, so that other people can find value in it and add their own value.
Excellent. You've decentralized yourself.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, if there's any way you can make it out to Kuala Lumpur in the middle of August, my friends and I will be attending the Blockonomics Summit.
I was in Kuala Lumpur.
Hope to see you
there.
I
was in Kuala Lumpur last year, and the year before that, I did a couple of events there. It's one of my favorite cities. Certainly love Malaysia, and I hope to be back again.
Hope this is the first of many interactions between us. I really appreciate your time and contributing your valuable efforts and insights. This is nothing short of an honor and treat for me, sir. As a lifelong student, I appreciate what you've done to advance the knowledge of this,
thank you so
one
much.
Of humanity's greatest gifts to itself. Yeah. So please let me know how I can return the favor and or contribute to any publications or products otherwise moving forward.
Oh, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I hope this video helps educate some more people in your particular industry.
Excellent. Well, with that, I'll conclude, and I'll thank you very much again, sir.
All right. Have a good one. Take care, Sean.
You too, sir. Cheers.